The snow had been falling since before dawn, and by 7 in the morning it had buried the chain-link fence around Arctic Sky Aviation's maintenance apron under 2 feet of white silence. The kind of silence that made you think the world had decided to stop, if only for a few hours, and hold its breath. Inside Hangar 4, the world had not stopped. It hummed and clattered and hissed with the particular chaos of deadline pressure. The overhead fluorescents flickering against polished aluminum, the smell of hydraulic fluid and de-icing solvent hanging in the frozen air, the muffled roar of wind battering the corrugated steel walls. 3 EC-135 light helicopters sat in various stages of inspection, their cowlings open like sleeping birds with their chests exposed. Ethan Cole was on his knees beside the third one. He had been there for 40 minutes. His right hand rested flat against the lower cowling panel near the accessory drive housing, fingers spread, utterly still. His eyes were half closed. Anyone who didn't know him might have thought he'd dozed off. Anyone who did know him would have stepped back and stayed quiet. Marcus Webb, the junior mechanic, leaned against a tool cart 15 feet away and watched. He'd been working with Ethan for 8 months. He still couldn't explain exactly what Ethan was doing in moments like these, but he had learned not to interrupt. The hangar door at the far end swung open with a metallic bang, and cold air punched through the space like a fist. Victoria Kane walked in wearing a charcoal gray overcoat over her blazer, her dark hair pulled back tight, her heels clicking against the concrete floor with a rhythm that communicated precisely how little patience she had left. She was 38 years old, held an MBA from Wharton, and had been CEO of Arctic Sky Aviation for exactly 94 days. She was also running 4 hours behind on a quarterly review that would determine whether 3 of her investors renewed their commitments. She stopped when she reached the third helicopter. She looked at Ethan on his knees. She looked at the inspection tablet clipped to the cart beside Marcus, its screen showing a green-bordered status summary. "Cole," she said. Ethan didn't move. "Cole." Louder this time. He opened his eyes slowly, the way a man surfaces from deep water. He looked up at her without standing. "I need sign-off on this one," she said. 40 minutes ago. "I know. The crew is waiting. The client is waiting. We have a weather window that closes in," she checked her phone, 90 minutes. "I heard you." He withdrew his hand from the cowling. He looked at it, then at the helicopter. "There's something wrong with the accessory drive." Victoria looked at the tablet. "Diagnostics are green." "I know what the diagnostics say." "Then what exactly is the problem, Ethan?" He got to his feet slowly, not because he was in pain, but because he was choosing his words. He was a big man, 6'2", wide through the shoulders, with hands that looked like they'd been carved for exactly this kind of work. His face was weathered in the way that Alaska weather is weathered, from the outside in, over a long time, by things that don't apologize. "There's a harmonic resonance in the accessory drive," he said. "Comes and goes. It's not consistent enough to trigger the sensors, but it's there. I can feel it when the engine's at low RPM. He paused. "I've heard it before. On a T-700. Same frequency, same irregular rhythm. That engine seized 17 hours later." Victoria looked at him. Then at the tablet. Then back at him. "The T-700 is a turboshaft engine for military rotorcraft," she said. "This is a civilian light helicopter. They're not comparable. The physics are comparable. The diagnostics are green, Cole. Every sensor, every readout, every automated check. Green." "Yes, ma'am." "Then sign it." Ethan looked at the helicopter for a moment. Something moved behind his eyes, not anger, not defiance, but something older and quieter than either. "No," he said. The hangar went very still. Marcus stopped breathing. 2 other mechanics at the far end of the building suddenly found reasons to study their tools very closely. Victoria's jaw tightened. "I beg your pardon? I won't sign the airworthiness certificate on that helicopter." He said it the same way he might have said the wind was coming from the northwest. Not until I've pulled the accessory drive assembly and done a physical inspection. That's a 4-hour job. 3. If you let me work. We don't have 3 hours. I know. She stared at him. He looked back at her without flinching, and she recognized in that look something she hadn't encountered often in her career. A man who had already made his decision and was simply waiting for the conversation to catch up to it. I've been patient with your methods, Ethan. I've read your file. I know your history, but I run a business, and right now that business needs you to sign a document that every piece of technology in this hangar says is accurate. I understand. Then sign it. The word landed like a dropped wrench. Victoria Kane looked around the hangar slowly, deliberately, making sure everyone who was pretending not to watch understood what was about to happen. Effective immediately, she said, her voice dropping to a register that was somehow more dangerous for being quieter. Your employment with Arctic Sky Aviation is terminated. Please return your access badge to Sandra at the front desk. Collect your personal items. Marcus will escort you out. Ethan held her gaze for exactly 3 seconds. Then, he nodded once. He walked to his locker at the far wall. He opened it, took out a child's drawing a crayon helicopter, lopsided and cheerful, with Daddy written in careful block letters at the bottom, and folded it into his jacket pocket. He took off his Arctic Sky coveralls and hung them on the hook inside the door. Underneath, he wore a faded gray thermal and dark work jeans. He pulled on his jacket, his insulated gloves, his boots. Then he walked to the small windowed waiting room at the corner of the hangar, where a 9-year-old girl was sitting cross-legged on a plastic chair, drawing in a sketchbook, her backpack on the floor beside her feet and her dark braids pulled back with a yellow elastic. Lily Cole looked up when her father appeared in the doorway. "We going?" she asked. "Yeah," he said. "We're going." She closed the sketchbook without argument, tucked it into her bag, and stood up. She was a small girl, composed beyond her years, with her father's steady eyes and her mother's fine-boned face. She had spent enough time in hangars and waiting rooms to understand that some things didn't need explaining right away. She took his hand. They walked out through the side door together, into the snow. The wind hit them immediately, cutting sideways across the apron, driving ice crystals against exposed skin. Ethan bent slightly to shield Lily, and she tucked herself against his side, and together they moved across the white toward the parking lot where his truck waited. Behind them, the hangar door swung shut with a deep, metallic boom, and the sound the door made was the same sound, Ethan thought, that a chapter ending makes. The truck was a 2009 Ford F-250, dark blue under the accumulated grime of 3 Alaskan winters. The heater worked on the passenger side but not the driver's side, which was why Lily got the blanket from behind the seat and why Ethan drove with his left hand tucked under his thigh at red lights. He didn't talk much on the drive through Anchorage. Lily didn't push him. She watched the snow pile up on windowsills and parked cars and the tops of traffic lights, and she drew in her sketchbook a helicopter. Again, because she had grown up knowing helicopters the way some children grow up knowing dogs or garden flowers. Ethan drove and thought about the accessory drive. He thought about it the way a doctor thinks about a symptom that doesn't quite fit the chart. Not anxiously, but persistently. Turning it over, examining it from different angles. The vibration had a frequency he recognized from deep in his memory, from a time when he'd spent 12 years developing a vocabulary for mechanical sounds that most people couldn't hear at all. He had joined the Navy at 22, after 2 years of community college and a growing certainty that whatever he was supposed to do with his life involved engines. The Navy sent him to aviation machinist's mate school at Pensacola, and what happened there was the thing that Ethan described, on the rare occasions he described it at all, as a door opening in a room he hadn't known existed. He was good. Not in the way that showed up on standardized evaluations or efficiency metrics, though those were fine too. He was good in the way that mattered most in the middle of the Pacific Ocean at 2 in the morning with a T-700G E4 01C, throwing irregular combustion cycles, and a crew of 4, depending on whether the man with his hands inside the engine housing could feel what the computers couldn't quantify. He was assigned to the HSC 2-1 Squadron. He flew deployments on the USS Ronald Reagan and the USS Carl Vinson. He worked on MH-60R Seahawks in conditions that would have grounded most civilian operations 40-knot winds on a pitching deck, spray that turned to ice before it hit the metal, temperatures that made tools feel like they'd been welded to your hands. He developed a diagnostic method that his supervisors alternately praised in official evaluations and struggled to document in any format that made sense to people who hadn't watched him use it. He listened. He touched. He developed a relationship with turbine engines that was less technical in the conventional sense, and more his commanding officer, Commander Neil Bradshaw, had once written in an evaluation phenomenological. Ethan hadn't known what the word meant until he looked it up, but he thought it was probably accurate. He married Claire Renner in 2012, between deployments. Lily came in 2015. Claire left in 2018, not because she didn't love him, but because loving a man who was gone 9 months of the year and quiet for 3 more had worn something down in her that she couldn't rebuild. The divorce was civil and sad and completely without bitterness, because Ethan was not a bitter person. He separated from the Navy in 2019 when Lily was 4 and needed a father who was physically present in the same time zone. He carried a Golden Wrench Award, a spot on the T-700 Maintenance Advisory Board, and a reputation that had traveled ahead of him in ways he had no idea about. He took the job at Arctic Sky Aviation because it was Anchorage, and Anchorage was where Lily's school was. And where Lily's school was, that was where Ethan Cole would be. He did not sign airworthiness certificates on aircraft he would not put his daughter on. He had never made an exception to this rule. He did not plan to start. While Ethan drove through the snow, Victoria Kane stood in her glass-walled office above the hangar floor and looked at her quarterly operations dashboard. Red, yellow, red, more red. She pulled up the overtime log. Ethan Cole accounted for 23% of the department's overtime in the past quarter, most of it on inspections that other mechanics had completed in a third of the time. She pulled up the delay records. 11 scheduled departures delayed in the past 90 days, 8 of them attributed to coal-related inspection extensions. On paper, he was a liability. She had taken over Arctic Sky from a founder who had run it with what her investors diplomatically described as relationship-oriented management. What they meant was that the founder had kept people like Ethan Cole on staff because they were good, and goodness was a value the founder understood intuitively, even when he couldn't quantify it. Victoria's investors did not share this intuition. They shared a spreadsheet. The spreadsheet said that Arctic Sky's labor costs were 18% above industry average. Its on-time departure rate was 11 points below its nearest regional competitor, and its maintenance inspections averaged 40% longer than comparable operators. She had come to Anchorage with a mandate: professionalize the operation, cut the fat, hit the numbers by end of Q2. She had not come here expecting to find that the fat had a name. She sat down at her desk and drafted the termination paperwork. Her hands were steady. She was good at this. She had restructured 2 other companies before this one, and she understood that sentiment was a luxury that operators in thin-margin aviation could not afford. What she did not understand, what she had no framework for understanding, was that the vibration Ethan Cole had felt in the accessory drive housing of helicopter N471SA was real. She didn't know this yet. She would. Marcus Webb stood in front of the EC-135 for a long time after Ethan left. He was 26 years old, 18 months out of technical school, competent in the way that training produces competence, and inexperienced in the way that only time can correct. He had watched Ethan Cole work for 8 months, had tried to understand what Ethan was doing when he pressed his hand flat against a panel and went quiet, had mostly concluded that it was a combination of experience and something else. something that didn't have a category in the curriculum he'd studied. He looked at the diagnostic tablet. Green across every field. He looked at the helicopter. He thought about the job he needed to keep. He picked up the stylus and signed the airworthiness certificate. The EC-135, with tail number N471, SA was cleared for operations at 9:47 a.m. The crew rolled it out of Hangar 4 at 10:12. By 10:31, it was airborne, climbing through low cloud cover into the gray Alaskan sky, carrying a geological survey team of 4 toward the Kenai Peninsula. Marcus watched it go. He told himself the diagnostics were green. He told himself Ethan was wrong sometimes too, that no one was right 100% of the time, that the sensors and the computers represented decades of accumulated engineering that didn't make mistakes. He picked up a wrench and went back to work. He did not tell anyone about his doubts. He would carry them for a long time. By 1 in the afternoon, Victoria had moved on. She had a conference call with investors in Seattle at 2. She had a draft performance improvement plan for the maintenance department on her screen. She had approved a revised scheduling template that reduced inspection windows by 30% across the board. She was typing when she heard it. Not a sound, exactly. More of a pressure change, a sudden alteration in the quality of air in the building, as if something very large had displaced a great deal of it very quickly. The fluorescent lights in the office flickered once. Then the windows began to rattle. Then the snow outside the windows began to rise. It rose in great spiraling columns, lifted from the apron and the parking lot and the roof of the hangar, whipped into horizontal sheets, and then upward into a rotor wash that turned the world outside the glass into a white chaos. The sound arrived a moment later, not a sound so much as a physical fact. A bass frequency that came up through the floor and into the soles of her feet, and vibrated somewhere in her chest cavity that she could not name. She stood up from her desk. Through the snow and the rotor wash, she could see it descending. A large gray helicopter, military markings sharp against the overcast sky, its twin engines at a frequency entirely different from anything she had in her hangars. It came down with the controlled authority of something that had been doing this for a long time in conditions far worse than these. It landed on the apron in front of Hangar 4. The rotors wound down. The snow settled. 2 figures in flight suits climbed out, and they moved through the remaining gusts toward the hangar entrance, with the particular economy of motion that people develop when urgency has become habitual. Victoria came down from her office. The pilot who entered first was somewhere in his late 30s, compact and weathered, with the bearing of someone who had spent years in environments where posture meant something. He removed his helmet and looked around the hangar until his eyes settled on Victoria. "I'm looking for Ethan Cole," he said. His voice was flat and direct, carrying no particular deference and no particular hostility. It was the voice of a man who was accustomed to asking for what he needed and receiving it. Victoria felt something shift in her stomach. "Mr. Cole is no longer employed here," she said. "I'm Victoria Kane, CEO. Can I help you?" The pilot looked at her for a moment. Then he looked at the pilot behind him, who had the kind of face that withheld all reaction, and turned back. "My name is Commander Garrett Holt, United States Navy. I need Ethan Cole." He paused. "Do you have a number for him?" She stopped. "What is this regarding?" "We have an MH-60R with a rotor system issue that our maintenance team cannot diagnose. We're on a 48-hour operational window." Someone gave me Ethan's name. He said this without elaboration, as if the sequence were entirely logical. He was Aviation Machinist's Mate First Class, HSC-21. We served together. He was on the T-700 advisory board. If he can't find it, it can't be found. The hangar was very quiet. Marcus Webb stood at the back of the space, holding a wrench he had forgotten he was holding. He was looking at Victoria. She was not looking at him. "I can give you his number," she said. Her voice was controlled. Nothing showed. "I'd appreciate that." She pulled out her phone. She found Cole. Ethan, in the contacts, still there, because IT hadn't finished the off-boarding process and read out the number. Garrett Holt dialed it right there in the hangar. He turned slightly away. The conversation was brief. When he turned back, he said, "He'll be here in 20 minutes," and walked toward the far wall to wait, and nobody said anything to stop him. The F-250 came through the gate at 1:47 p.m., moving carefully on the ice-covered apron surface, and parked 20 feet from the Navy helicopter. Ethan got out. He looked at the MH-60R for a moment, looked at it the way you look at something you know very well and haven't seen in a while. Then Garrett Holt came out of the hangar, and they shook hands, and whatever passed between them in that handshake was private and wordless, and clearly sufficient. Lily got out of the passenger side. She was wearing her puffy yellow coat and had her sketchbook under her arm. She looked at the Seahawk with wide, careful eyes. "Is that an R?" she asked her father. "Yeah. The sensors array is different from what you showed me in pictures. They updated it a few years ago." He looked down at her. "You stay in the truck where it's warm, okay? I'll leave it running." "I know," she said. She was already turning back toward the passenger door. Ethan watched her climb in. He stood for a moment in the snow, looking at nothing in particular, and then he turned toward the hangar. Victoria was standing near the entrance. He looked at her. She looked at him. Neither of them spoke. He walked past her without stopping, and she did not attempt to stop him. Inside the hangar, Garrett's co-pilot, Lieutenant Dana Foss, a woman in her early 30s with close-cropped auburn hair and an expression of concentrated worry, briefed Ethan on the symptom. Irregular vibration at low rotor RPM. Appeared at approximately the 45-minute mark on each sortie. Disappeared at cruise. The computers showed nothing. 3 mechanics had inspected the rotor head and found nothing. Ethan listened. He didn't take notes. He asked 4 questions, all of them specific, none of them replicating anything the computers would have covered. Then he put on a pair of work gloves from the supply cabinet he'd left his at the truck, walked outside to the MH-60R, and placed both hands on the transmission cowling. He stood there in the wind and the blowing snow, eyes half closed, and listened. No tablet, no sensor array, no digital readout. The MH-60R sat on the apron, and the wind came across it from the northwest at 15 knots, and Ethan Cole stood with his palms flat against the transmission housing, and he was entirely still. He stayed that way for 4 minutes. Garrett Holt stood 15 feet back and watched. Dana Foss stood beside Garrett. Victoria Kane stood in the hangar doorway and watched them all. Marcus Webb appeared at her shoulder, and she didn't tell him to go away. At the 4-minute mark, Ethan opened his eyes. He walked around the helicopter slowly, touching it at specific points, the main rotor head, the tail rotor drive shaft, the gearbox housing in a sequence that appeared random to everyone watching and probably wasn't. He crouched beside the main gearbox. He spent 90 seconds there. He stood up. "It's the main rotor shaft," he said. "Microfracture in the dynamic balance, weight at the 2 o'clock position on the upper hub assembly. It's not enough to show on static inspection. At low RPM, the unbalanced mass creates a harmonic that the dampeners partially suppress, which is why it disappears at cruise. The suppress system is masking it, not correcting it." He said this clearly and without drama, the way a plumber tells you where the leak is. Garrett Holt said, "How confident?" 92%. "The other 8 is that I might be hearing a transmission bearing, but if I'm hearing the bearing at that frequency, you have a bigger problem and you should have seen it on the temperature readout. We didn't. Then it's the balance weight. Can you get to it?" Ethan looked at the helicopter. He did a calculation that involved neither a computer nor a calculator. 2 hours to pull the hub assembly and inspect visually. Another hour to machine a corrected weight if my estimate on the offset is right. "You have the equipment?" "In the helicopter. We carry a portable machining kit. Then 3 hours, maybe 3.5. Garrett Holt looked at his watch, looked at the operational window he'd described. "Get started," he said, and Ethan Cole got started. The next 3 hours were quiet and methodical and, to anyone who watched them carefully, something close to a demonstration of what a human being looks like when they are doing exactly what they were made to do. Ethan worked without music, without commentary, without the performative intensity that some technicians use to signal how hard they're working. He moved through the disassembly sequence with a precision that had no wasted gestures. Each fastener removed went into a labeled tray. Each component that came off was set down with care and examined before it was set aside. Dana Foss worked with him, handing tools and holding components when a second pair of hands was needed. She had been a maintenance officer for 6 years and considered herself competent, and watching Ethan work recalibrated her understanding of what competence could look like. When he pulled the upper hub assembly and exposed the main rotor shaft, he held it under the work light and turned it slowly. The dynamic balance weight at the 2 o'clock position was a machined aluminum disc, 12 centimeters in diameter, secured by 4 precision fasteners. It looked identical to the one at the 10 o'clock position. Ethan took a digital micrometer from the portable kit and measured the mass distribution across the disc's surface. He compared it to the spec sheet he had Dana pull up on her tablet. "There," he said, and pointed. Dana looked. "I don't see it. 0.3 grams asymmetry on the outer radius." He showed her the measurement. "The spec is 0.05. She looked at the number. "That's the machining tolerance is supposed to be. Whatever it was supposed to be isn't what it is." He set down the micrometer. "It came off the line like this, or it was impacted at some point and nobody caught the mass change." Either way, he machined the correction himself, using the portable kit, adjusting the outer radius of the balance weight by removing a precise amount of material from a specific arc. He measured. He machined again. He measured again. When the micrometer read 0.04 grams asymmetry, he stopped. He reassembled the hub in reverse sequence, each fastener torqued to spec, each component replaced in the correct orientation. He did not rush. "At 5:02 p.m., he said, ready to spin up. Garrett Holt climbed into the cockpit. Dana Foss took the co-pilot seat. The engines started that particular turbine whine, winding up from nothing to operational frequency, and the main rotor began to turn. They held at low RPM for 8 minutes. Then, Garrett's voice came through the open cockpit door, smooth as glass. Ethan nodded once. He pulled off his gloves and set them on the tool cart. Victoria Kane had been in the hangar for most of it. She had gone back to her office twice, answered emails she couldn't remember afterward, returned to the hangar floor without fully deciding to. She had watched Ethan work with an attention she didn't entirely understand, and sometime in the second hour she had begun to understand that she was not watching a difficult personality or a slow worker or an obstacle to operational efficiency. She was watching someone who knew something she didn't. When the rotor wound down and Garrett emerged from the cockpit and shook Ethan's hand again, she waited until the Navy pilots had stepped away to file their operational notes before she approached. Ethan was breaking down the tool setup, returning items to the portable kit in the order they'd come from it. "The EC-135, she said. N471, SA. He looked up. "The one that departed this morning." She stopped. She started again. "You said there was a vibration in the accessory drive. The same kind of issue? Related principle. Different component." He set down a torque wrench. "The accessory drive on the 135 has a shaft that spins off the main gearbox to power the hydraulic pump and the electrical system. If that shaft develops a balance issue, similar cause to what we just fixed here, it creates heat at the bearing races. Slow accumulation. The temperature sensors don't catch it until it's already past the point of self-correction. What happens then?" He looked at her directly. "The bearing fails. The shaft seizes. You lose hydraulic pressure to the tail rotor. In forward flight, over open water. He paused. You have about 40 seconds to auto-rotate before you lose meaningful control authority. The hangar was very still. How long? She asked. How long would it have taken, from where it was when I felt it this morning? 40 to 60 hours of flight time before the bearing runs hot enough to fail. He said it without emphasis. Just the number. You probably had 15 sorties left in it. Maybe 12. Victoria looked at the hangar floor. She thought about the geological survey crew. She thought about the Kenai Peninsula. She thought about the water between here and there. I need to recall that aircraft, she said. I need to have it inspected. By you. He said nothing. She looked up. I owe you an apology. I owe you more than an apology. I fired you publicly in front of your crew because I was behind on a performance metric. And the aircraft you refused to sign is currently flying with a mechanical issue you identified by hand, without instruments. She paused. I am not good at this, at being wrong. But I'm trying to be honest with you right now. Ethan looked at her for a long moment. I appreciate that, he said. I want you back. He didn't answer immediately. He picked up the torque wrench and placed it in the kit. I need to check on my daughter, he said. Lily was in the truck, asleep, her sketchbook open across her lap to a drawing of the MH-60R. That was, from a structural standpoint, surprisingly accurate for a 9-year-old. Ethan stood outside the truck for a moment, looking at her through the window, then turned back toward the hangar. Garrett Holt was standing near the MH-60R, completing his post-maintenance documentation on a tablet. He looked up when Ethan approached. She wants you back, Ethan said. I know. I could hear most of that from here. Garrett tapped something into the tablet. What are you going to do? I don't know yet. Cole. Garrett set down the tablet. You know what you have. You've always known what you have. The question is whether you're going to let someone else decide what it's worth. Ethan was quiet for a while. She's running a business that operates on thin margins, he said finally. She's not wrong about the efficiency problems. I do take longer than the other mechanics, because you're doing something different from what the other mechanics are doing. She doesn't have a category for it. Then give her one. Ethan looked at the Seahawk. He thought about Lily sleeping in the truck. He thought about the EC-135 somewhere over the Kenai Peninsula with a bearing that was accumulating heat at a rate no sensor was currently measuring. He went back inside. Victoria was on the phone when he returned to the hangar floor. She was calm, businesslike, directing someone at the other end to coordinate a return for N471SA. She finished the call and put the phone in her pocket and looked at him. I'm listening, she said. 3 conditions, he said. Non-negotiable. She nodded. First, I have final authority on airworthiness sign-offs. If I say an aircraft doesn't fly, it doesn't fly. No override, no chain of command review, no committee. My signature, my call. Agreed. Second, my schedule is built around my daughter's school calendar. I start at 7, I finish at 3 unless there's an emergency. Emergencies get defined by me, not by departure windows. She was quiet for a moment. There will be operational situations where you need someone at 4 a.m. who can hear what your sensors can't. I understand. I'll be available by phone, and I'll come in when it's actually necessary. But I define necessary. Agreed, she said. What's the third? 22% pay increase. Retroactive 60 days. She blinked. You said 20? 22. I've thought about the number. He said it without apology. I'm not expensive for what I prevent. I'm inexpensive. She thought about 45 minutes of labor versus 2 years of litigation and FAA investigation and wrongful death proceedings. She thought about the families of 4 geological surveyors. She thought about the bearing in N471SA, accumulating heat over the Kenai Peninsula. 22%, she said. Agreed. He looked at her one more time, That long, measuring look that she was beginning to understand was not rudeness but evaluation, and nodded. "I'll have the 135's accessory drive pulled and inspected by 9 tomorrow morning," he said. "After that, I want to do a systematic review of the full maintenance history for all aircraft in the fleet. I want to see what the logs say, and then I want to put my hands on each one." "How long will that take?" "As long as it takes," he said. "That's kind of the point." He turned to go. Then he stopped. "Miss Kane. Victoria. Victoria." He said it once, trying the shape of it. "The diagnostic systems are very good. I want you to know I think they're very good. They're not wrong often. But the thing about the failure mode I found today, and the one in your 135, is that it's in the gap between measurement intervals. It's in the time between one data point and the next. The sensors tell you what is. They don't tell you what's becoming." He paused. "That's the part I do." She looked at him. She thought about the spreadsheet. She thought about the quarterly review. "I know," she said. "I know that now." The recall notice for N471 SA went out at 5:47 p.m. The EC-135 returned to Anchorage the following morning and was met on the apron by Ethan Cole, who had arrived at 6:50 with a thermos of coffee and a child's yellow lunchbox that he set on the tool cart beside his kit. He pulled the accessory drive assembly at 7:15. By 8:40, he had the bearing out and on the inspection bench under a work light. The outer race showed the beginning of micro-pitting along a 20-degree arc, the early signature of thermal fatigue in a component that was running slightly out of balance. It had maybe 32 flight hours left in it. He machined a corrected shaft and had the assembly back together by noon. Marcus Webb watched all of it from the periphery, as he had watched for 8 months. When Ethan was cleaning his tools at the end of the morning, Marcus came over. "I signed it," Marcus said. "This morning. After you left." He said it quietly, looking at the floor. "I know you know that. I just wanted to say it to you directly." Ethan set down the cloth he was using. "I know," he said. "I looked at the diagnostics and they were green and Marcus." Ethan waited until the younger man looked up. "You're going to remember this. That's the important thing. You're going to carry this with you every time you hold a stylus over a certificate, and it's going to make you better at this work than you could have become any other way." He paused. "That's not nothing. That's actually quite a lot." Marcus nodded. He went back to his station. He was quiet for the rest of the day, but it was a different kind of quiet than the one before. By late afternoon, the snow had slowed. It didn't stop in Anchorage in January. It rarely stopped entirely, but it slowed to a deliberate fall, each flake taking its time, and the light shifted from the white-gray of a heavy sky to something almost luminous, as if the clouds had thinned just enough to let through what was on the other side. Lily was in the waiting room at 3 o'clock when Ethan came to get her. She had finished her helicopter drawing and moved on to something else, a dog, it looked like, with improbably large ears and a small backpack. "How was school?" he asked. "We're doing fractions," she said. "Miss Henley says I'm good at them." "You are good at them." She climbed into her coat. She picked up her bag. She took his hand. They walked out through the side door of the hangar together, into the quiet snowfall. Behind them, the hangar hummed. The fluorescent lights steadied. Somewhere in the back of the building, a compressor cycled on with its familiar rhythm, and for a moment the whole space, the tools, and the aircraft and the cold metal walls felt like something that was, at last, running as it was meant to run. Ethan Cole did not look back. He already knew what was there.